All right, let's get this thing rolling. Well, hello. I'm real excited today. We got a beautiful sunny day, which is kind of nice for a change. I'm Jim Morgan. I'm with Caring Transitions and Life's Co-Pilot. And today, Life's Co-Pilot, we are excited to introduce Dennis Frick, who is the Director of Senior Law Project with Indiana Legal Services. Met him at an MCCOA meeting, which is basically Marion County Council on Aging. So anyway, so we met and got the chance to hear what he's up to. So very excited about what they're doing. I don't know a lot of people even know that you exist or that these services are available, which is one reason Life Co-Pilot is available. We're trying to get information out to seniors and their family members and their caregivers about stuff that they may not find out until they wish they had. So Dennis, introduce yourself and who you are and all that kind of good stuff.
Well, thank you, Jim, and thanks for inviting me here today. So I'm Dennis Frick. I'm an attorney with the Senior Law Project at Indiana Legal Services. And Senior Law Project is a special project within the bigger firm, Indiana Legal Services. I've got a PowerPoint with a few slides I'm going to share here in just a second and talk about both the organization as a whole and where the Senior Law Project fits in, what we do with seniors, and how they can access our services. So let me share so if I share my screen, right?
Yep, that little green button should do it.
Does that
there you go.
do it?
Yep.
And then if I go to the PowerPoint and slideshow from current slide.
Yeah, look at that.
Is that showing it?
That looks great.
Okay. So Indiana Legal Services is the organization name. Our kind of catchphrase is equal access to justice. That's our goal of providing that to our client population. So we are statewide nonprofit law firm, primarily federally funded. And we've actually been around since the 1970s. And I think the genesis of this was that legal assistance is available to low-income persons in criminal cases because the courts have to appoint public defenders. But in most other kinds of cases, people are not entitled to have an attorney appointed for them. And it's hard to get equal treatment if you don't have representation. So funding, there was some federal funding came, and eventually federal funding was provided to provide legal assistance throughout the country in all areas to low-income persons. That federal funding, is kind of ebbed and flowed. Sometimes we've had cuts, sometimes we've had increases, we've had to sometimes lay off people. But we now have one firm, one organization, Indiana Legal Services in Indiana, that gets federal funding through, and the federal funding flows through a federal kind of separate agency called the Legal Services Corporation. And we get funding to provide legal assistance to low-income persons in civil matters. In addition, the organization seeks out additional funding to provide additional assistance to persons. And one of the areas where we get additional assistance is funding for seniors under the Older Americans Act. The Older Americans Act specifically provides that, and it provides grants to states to provide assistance in a lot of different areas. Information and referral programs, home care, all kinds of different services available to seniors, nutrition, the meal centers, those kind of things. In addition, under the Older Americans Act, there is funding that flows to the states for legal assistance and for ombudsman services that I'll also talk about. And so the Senior Law Project in Indiana Legal Services receives funding under the Older Americans Act that actually flows through Family and Social Services Administration down through the area aging agencies. And so we receive assistance under the Older Americans Act in several areas around the state. And then the Senior Law Project also receives funding to provide ombudsman advocacy services to residents in licensed nursing homes and assisted living facilities. So I'm the director of the Senior Law Project that's located in our Indianapolis office. And we in the Indianapolis office get funding through several different area aging agencies. So I've just listed the ones. Areas 6 and the main cities there are Anderson, Muncie, and Marion, although the area 6 home office is actually located in Yorktown. And then Socoa, which is area 8, which is Indianapolis and the surrounding counties. Area 9, which is Richmond and some surrounding counties. Area 10, which is Bloomington and Monroe County. And Area 11, which is Columbus and some surrounding counties. So we provide legal assistance in the counties that are covered in each of those AAAs out of the Senior Law Project here in the Indianapolis office.
So you basically cover, and even if it's in 6 or 9 or 11 out of Indy, you do that?
Out of Indy, yes. Yeah. And then we receive funding for ombudsman services in not only each of those areas, but some other areas around the state, which I've listed. And those ombudsmen are supervised out of the Senior Law Project. We do have one ombudsman in the state that's our lead ombudsman, and she's over the other ombudsman, and then coordinates with me as needed when we have issues that we need legal assistance or other issues. So I'll talk a little bit. So Indiana Legal Services in general, and of course, ILS, as I refer to it, as under its federal funding. With the federal funding, of course, come a lot of federal guidelines and regulations. So generally for ILS to represent somebody, a person has to meet certain financial eligibility guidelines. So generally speaking, they have to be under 200% of the federal poverty guidelines. Typically have, they can own their home, but financial assets typically limited to $10,000 to qualify for assistance from Indiana Legal Services.
Outside of their home?
Outside of their home, right. The home doesn't count. And typically we don't count monies that are in a retirement account. Since hopefully cars? That's being held for retirement.
Automobiles or?
Automobile, we don't count. At least one vehicle's exempt.
Okay.
And yeah, they can have autos.
So
and household goods we're really not going to look at unless they had, valuable collection of artwork or
cash value life or
pardon?
Cash value life insurance.
We're typically not looking at that like Medicaid would say.
Okay, so basically it's money in the bank.
We're looking at money in the bank, checking, savings, CDs, investment accounts, if they have anything like that. But we have more flexibility for seniors because the Older Americans Act actually says we're not to deny services based on income or assets. It also directs that we're to provide assistance to those people that have an economic or social need. So that basically means we just have more flexibility. Basically our goal is not to provide assistance in cases where the person is likely going to be able to retain a private attorney to represent them. So if somebody has a situation where they may be over the regular ILS guidelines, but they probably would have difficulty obtaining an attorney to represent them, we can potentially represent them. Or let's say they're under a guardianship where they don't really have access to their funds and they may have a basis to challenge the guardianship. We could potentially look at representing them, even though they may They may theoretically have assets, they just really don't have much access to them. And then on the ombudsman side, any resident of a nursing home or a licensed assistance living facility is eligible for ombudsman services. There's really not any kind of financial test. And really the program is, they always refer to it as resident directed. They're looking at what the resident wants and then seeking to help meet the resident's needs. I will mention on the legal assistance, with the federal funding we receive, there are some specific federal guidelines. For instance, we're typically not able to represent undocumented, non-citizens. If somebody has legal permanent residency, we can represent them. There's a whole complicated set of guidelines, so we have to review. But basically, an undocumented alien we're not able to represent.
So just if anyone's wondering, would you explain what an ombudsman services are?
Yeah, let me hop ahead. I got a slide on that one too.
Never mind. Okay, that's right. Yeah.
So basically, the ombudsman, I'm told the ombudsman is originally a Swedish term. And I like to think of it, it's just a fancy word for an advocate. So the ombudsman's goal, and the ombudsman, a lot of our ombudsmen have a social work background. They're typically not attorneys. We do have one ombudsman who is an attorney. But typically the ombudsmen are advocates who are working to resolve care issues for residents. So and I like to explain it as it's their goal to assist the residents in receiving quality care. So it can range from kind of simple things on information on how do you locate a facility? How do you find the Medicare Compare materials on looking at what the star ratings are for facilities, to trying to navigate the Department of Health survey result ratings for facilities, what you should look for when you go to a facility, to trying to resolve care issues. That can range from, the typical complaint about the quality of food to they don't respond when I push the call button, to I'm not getting the therapy that I believe I need, or various things like that. And one of the things, particularly in the nursing homes, is they are required to have care planning meetings at least, I believe, once a quarter. And some of those end up being, I think, in some facilities, fairly pro forma. But if they're done correctly, the goal is to get people from the different disciplines in, have the resident there, find out what the resident's needs are, and come up with a plan to meet the resident's needs. And so the ombudsman will potentially in some cases go in with the resident to the care plan meeting, help them kind of think through what their goals are and present that to the staff to try to come up with a plan, and then follow through to make sure no plan's any good if it's not followed. And then the services also range up to assisting residents who receive involuntary transfer and discharge notices. A lot of the things that we're doing, particularly in the nursing home arena, there are detailed federal laws and federal regulations that detail a lot of the things that facilities are required to do, that give a lot of rights to residents. For instance, there is language that says every facility has to have, although in Indiana it doesn't actually set typically minimum staffing levels, there is some regulations at the federal level if they go into effect. we'll eventually set minimum staffing levels, but basically in Indiana, it says you have to have adequate staff to meet the needs of the residents that you have in the facility. Well, facilities have staffing issues, don't always staff sufficiently. So that could be an issue that would advocate on. And then there's also a federal requirement that the state have an appeal process if a nursing home seeks to involuntarily transfer or discharge a resident. And Indiana actually applies that same process to residents in licensed assistance living facilities. So what happens is, unless there's an emergency, the facility has to give a 30-day notice of transfer or discharge. They can only transfer for certain reasons. They have to locate a transfer location. They then give the notice to the resident, and if they have a family member involved, like a guardian or an attorney in fact under a power of attorney, give notice to them. That resident then has 10 days to file an appeal with the state, and then an administrative law judge would hold a prompt hearing, and our ombudsman would periodically represent residents in those hearings to defend against the discharge. And sometimes it's more a matter of trying to work it out with the facility on a way for the resident to remain there. So the reasons for discharge can include non-payment of the bill, the facility determining that they cannot meet the resident's needs, that the resident is a health or safety risk, or that the resident's condition has improved enough that they no longer need to be in the facility. Don't see that challenge too often if they're, but those are the typical kind of ombudsman services. So it ranges from, informing the resident of what their rights are and kind of telling them, hey, you can talk to the staff. It's up to the resident whether they want to get the ombudsman involved, or in some cases, the ombudsman then will assist them by helping to talk to facility staff. The goal is to work it out with the facility. And in appropriate cases, advising the resident of their right to file complaints with the Indiana Department of Health. If they believe that their rights have been violated or the facility is doing something that's not in line with the regulations. But the goal is trying to get issues resolved so that the person can get quality care in the facility.
Well, very good. So what, when you're talking about it's like 200% of the poverty or whatever, what more or less, ballpark, I guess is what I'm trying to figure out. Where would that kind of fall into?
So for a single person, that'd be roughly $2,600 a month. And I'm looking for a household of two, that would be roughly $3,500 a month.
Okay. Well, knowing what my uncle just passed, but I was caring for him and his and also for my mom. From a Social Security standpoint, they're half of that. So So it's
so they would meet that criteria.
Yeah. So what if someone has a trust that like an irrevocable trust? Does that money just not, would they still qualify? Or
if they set it up in an irrevocable trust, and we'd look to see, I suppose, to what extent is that trust really available to meet their needs? Is it really, do they no longer have control over it so that it's really not their money anymore? We're really not seeing those people coming in that much.
For them to qualify for like waiver, they would have to have no control over it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And typically they would have, looked at having set it up at least 5 years before. So it doesn't, if they've set it up within the prior 5 years, then you have a possibility of a transfer of assets penalty.
Right. I get you. Yeah. That works for you as well as like a waiver or for Medicaid?
We really wouldn't look at it quite that way for us. Okay. I was just thinking in terms of how it would work for Medicaid.
Well, I know how it works. Yeah, that's why because I know.
Yeah, we would. Yeah, we don't really see people giving their assets away so they can come in and qualify for our service.
Oh, I know.
We don't really look for that too much.
I just was gonna say, I know a lot of people, go that route. That's why I just was assuming people probably are in that situation. So,
Yeah, I mean, if they were potentially applying for Medicaid, we would, unless it's a situation where it's a couple situation where there's assets being protected for the community spouse, or there's enough assets to pay an
right.
attorney, we would, certainly ask them to see a private attorney in that case.
Okay. That's why I was just trying to, So, so what, who, how do people find you?
Okay,
Oh, look at that! I'm on top of this.
you are.
It's like
Although
we've been
I've skipped one slide on the legal services. We'll
Okay, I'll
get
let you
back
go
to
back
that
to
one if
that.
we need to. So, um, we have, and actually this works not only for the senior law projects, this works for any assistance through Indiana Legal Services. We have staff that do telephone interviews. So typically people are calling, they don't need to come into the office. They can telephone Monday through Thursday between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. at this toll-free number, 844-243-8570. And basically what happens when they call in, they'll be put on hold till the next available staff person is available to talk to them. They'll get information, name, address, all the contact information, kind of demographic information for our records. Then they'll get their income and asset information. And then the goal is that we get enough information about their problem, what they're seeking assistance for, that can then be routed to the appropriate staff to review to determine if we can assist them and what level. And then I also posted a person can also apply online at www.indianalegalservices.org and just click on Get Help. And then for instance, in our area, basically all of the cases for people 60 and over are sent to myself and my staff to review. We sit down actually every Monday afternoon and review all the cases that have come in, all the requests for assistance that have come in the prior week, determine which we can assist, which we can't. For the ones that we're assisting, then we decide, who to assign it to assist. And I do want to comment that our assistance ranges from, there are some situations where really all the person is needing is advice. They have a question, they need to know what to do in a situation. And so there's some situations where we're providing advice, and it ranges to potentially representing a person in court or in administrative proceedings. So for instance, in Medicaid appeals, in some of those cases, Medicaid gets denied. The person has a right to an administrative appeal and a hearing with an administrative law judge. If that person comes in seeking assistance, we would, analyze it, try to figure out if the decision was correct or incorrect. If we think it was incorrect, try to figure out if we can resolve it with the agency without having to go through the appeal process. But if needed, we can represent them in an administrative appeal with an administrative law judge. Once that decision is made and the agency makes its final decision, there is a ability to file for judicial review in state court. And we have certainly done some of those cases, including appealing up to the Indiana Court of Appeals and Indiana Supreme Court. I actually had one case, just one in my career, where I did seek review by the U.S. Supreme Court. Unfortunately, they weren't willing to review it because they don't review very many cases. I did want to back up, Jim, and talk a little bit about kind of the types of cases that we do here at the Senior Law Project. So I did mention civil cases only. We don't do any criminal defense, though we can in the organization sometimes assist with expungement of criminal records. Typically I would hand that off to somebody within the organization if it looked like that was appropriate. I've not done those expungements myself. We will not handle cases that the private attorneys would likely handle. So that means we would not handle, we're not going to handle a personal injury case or a medical malpractice case or any kind of case that might generate a fee for a private attorney. So those kind of cases where you see the ads on, we're not going to handle those.
Yeah, but on the flip side of that, in most cases, those attorneys are not going to, they may charge you a retainer, but they're going to do it on a split of the proceeds.
Yeah, a lot. Typically on the personal injury and the medical malpractice case, now they may charge for looking at records, but typically if they think the person has a good enough case, they'll take it on a flat contingency arrangement. So hopefully the person won't need to pay a retainer or a fee. We do have a guideline that says, if a case is what we call fee generating, and if it's rejected by at least 2 attorneys in private practice, we can consider taking that case. I will just say we're really not set up to do personal injury and medical malpractice cases. So even if the person, if the person can't find a private attorney to take it, that generally means the private attorneys don't think they have that good a case. But generally, we're not doing those. But we can get involved in fee generating cases if they are turned down by 2 or more attorneys. So some of the typical kind of cases that we do handle, I mentioned here, consumer cases, debt collection, some bankruptcy, credit reporting issues. On the debt collection, a lot of what we're seeing, particularly on the seniors, is advising them that their Social Security benefits are protected by federal law, cannot be garnished unless you owe a federal debt. If you owe a debt to a federal agency, there is a process where they can potentially take 15% of the Social Security funds, at least to the extent that you're getting more than $750 a month. So there is a process if you owe a federal debt. But otherwise, if a credit card company, a debt buyer, former landlord, medical provider sues somebody and gets a judgment, and all the person has is their only income is Social Security benefits. Those Social Security benefits are protected. They are also protected after they're deposited into their bank account. And there is a Treasury Department rule that says as long as your Social Security benefits or other protected benefits like veterans benefits are being direct deposited into your bank account, and that bank account has less than 2 months worth of Social Security benefits in it, then the creditor can't freeze that account. Normally, once a creditor has a judgment, if they can identify where that judgment debtor has a bank account, there's a process where the judgment creditor can send what are called interrogatories to the bank. And if the bank gets interrogatories and their records show that that person has an account at the bank, normally the bank has to freeze that account until a hearing is held in court and the judge can decide whether the creditor gets to take the money out of the account. In the Social Security context, because there's a federal law that says funds that are from Social Security are protected, and it used to be the case that that account would be frozen, and then the debtor would have to go to court and prove that it was their Social Security monies that were deposited. That got to be somewhat confusing if, let's say, you had Social Security and a small pension being deposited into the same account. The bank doesn't keep track of the dollars that are remaining in the account. Is that from the Social Security check? Is that from the pension check? And so the Treasury Department just adopted a rule saying if the bank account balance is no more than the total of your last 2 direct deposited Social Security benefits, then all the money in that bank account is protected. You don't have to try to sort out, you know, how much of it was the Social Security, how much of it is the pension. So we'll advise people about those things. In the guardianship context, it's been we don't establish guardianships because we sometimes have seniors coming in wanting to terminate the guardianship or try to defend against it. So we assist in guardianship defense and termination. We do, though, provide a lot of preparation of, we'll assist people to prepare power of attorney, healthcare advanced directives, those things. Housing, we can do a variety of things ranging from landlord-tenant issues, eviction defense, trying to resolve issues with the landlord. In home ownership, we can potentially represent persons in mortgage foreclosure or advise them. Land sale contracts, we get people at the lower end of the scale sometimes get into, buying real estate on a contract, and there can be some sticky issues that can come up there. So we can assist people in land sale contract cases. Public benefits, Medicaid. I do a lot of work with Medicaid, just advising people of what they can and can't do. Long-term, what they can do to apply to and qualify for long-term care, what they can't do with their assets, particularly if they come in and they're over the asset limit, but not by a lot, and they need to become eligible. Or if they're on Medicaid and they run into problems, now with the Medicaid waivers and the waiver wait lists, trying to help people navigate that system. We'll assist them with that and get involved in trying to troubleshoot issues and resolve issues that can come up on Medicaid, such as, if they get a termination notice at annual review that may or may not be correct. If it's not correct, getting that straightened out so that their benefits can continue, or if they really aren't still eligible, advising them what they need to do so they can once again become eligible. Talking to people about, Medicaid has lots of different categories. So for seniors, if you're in a long-term care facility, you really need, if you're over 65, you need Medicaid for the aged. If you're under 65, Medicaid for the disabled. But there are, particularly if you're not in a long-term care facility, if you're in the community, if you're on Medicare, there are some specific Medicaid programs that work for Medicare beneficiaries. So one of the programs I advise people on is the Medicaid QMB, Qualified Medicare Beneficiary Program, that basically works like, for people who qualify, it works like a Medicare supplement for anything that Medicare covers. Medicaid will pick up the copays and deductibles. It'll pay the person's Part B premium, so that $185 a month, that's the current annual Part B premium, won't be deducted. And then they qualify for full extra help for a prescription drug plan. And it has a higher income and asset guidelines. So the income limit is at 150% of the federal poverty guidelines. So I'm looking at my cheat sheet. Currently $1,957 a month for a single person. And the resource limit for that program is $9,660 for a single person, as opposed to $2,000 for full Medicaid for a person. So, particularly if somebody's living in the community, doesn't have long-term care needs, the QMB program can be a very nice Medicaid program, providing a lot of benefits, a lot of help to people. So it certainly steers some people towards that. And in fact, we get some people coming in with consumer issues, having trouble paying their bills, and we'll examine, is there public assistance that you can receive that you're not getting? There are some people that, are on Social Security and Medicare, and Medicare, Social Security's deducting $185 a month for their Part B premium, and I'll look at it and say, you could qualify for a program under Medicaid, and all of a sudden your net income is going to go up by $185 a month. That's for somebody who's living on the edge of meeting their monthly bills, that's a nice benefit to qualify for Medicaid and have the state pay the Part B premium. We get involved in some Social Security and SSI issues, particularly run into overpayment issues periodically. SNAP, which used to be called food stamps, but now is the official name is SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. But a lot of people still call it food stamps, so we can help with that. Like I said, we do document preparation, power of attorney, healthcare directives, wills, TOD deeds. Typically, if they're looking for a trust, we'll ask them to go to a private attorney on that. If they have enough assets to make it worthwhile to do a trust, they typically can pay a private attorney. And then there's there's always some miscellaneous matter that may come up where we can potentially provide assistance. I think I mentioned this before, we really are looking at a broad level of assistance. So there will be cases where we just give advice. There will be some cases where we're giving them forms themselves to use in court. And then there's other cases where we're doing direct representation. We just basically looking at our caseloads, the number of cases coming in, and what we think we're able to do at that point kind of governs how we'll treat that.
You say you do civil stuff, like for instance, if you have a lot of seniors right now are being scammed by, there's a roofing company that comes in and said they had to do things, or storm chasers, or you have people that right now, one of the things that's happening is a lot of these national real estate investors are coming in and buying these houses or what have you, and they're really not getting any representation. So and the seniors kind of confused in that whole process. Is there things there that you can be of service with these people, or?
We can be, and actually, Jim, you just hit another segue for me.
We're on a roll.
We are on a roll, Jim. So one of the things I wanted to mention is that Indiana Legal Services does have various special projects, often, aligned with special funding that we receive. And through the years, we have, had a number of issues with seniors who have been subject to identity theft, scamming, and so forth. And a number of years we did apply and we received special funding. And we now have, and this is a statewide project, they would still apply the same way, but it's the Legal Assistance for Victimized Adults project. And we receive additional funding through the Indiana Criminal Justice Institute that comes under the Federal Victims of Crime Act funds that are distributed to the states. And so we developed this project around the definition of persons that qualify for assistance under the Adult Protective Services Program in Indiana. So this program is available not only to seniors, but also to younger disabled, typically developmentally disabled persons who have been the victim of whether it's identity theft, a fly-by-night company, like you said, the people that show up after the storm and they're going to repair the roof and they get your money, and internet scams. Now, some of those things are difficult to find solutions for if the scammer is on the internet and, you know, is not anywhere locally where we can get at them. Sometimes it may be that the most that they're able to do is give advice and help that person to stop getting scammed in the future. And, you know, sometimes it's hard to convince our clients that what they're being subject to is a scam. You know, they want to believe that this person that's friends with them on Facebook is, they want to believe that person is a friend and is going to show up someday, even though they've been giving them money and they're never showing up when they say they will. But they're in contact with, you know, the federal authorities. So their definition, and it's kind of a loose, if they're the victim of something that could be considered to be a crime. So any kind of, you know, abuse, neglect, identity theft, those kind of scams you talked about, internet scams, contractor scams, are they at that special project. You know, if we can't assist them directly, we'll sometimes we'll send those cases over to our LAVA project. I always told them there, I always thought it should be Let Justice Flow. LAVA was the name there, but Legal Assistance for Victimized Adults. So I did want to mention we have some other special projects that do work with special populations. We have a low-income tax clinic. We have people that are subject, and they get funding, and hopefully that funding through the IRS will continue to work on federal tax issues. They can give advice on state tax issues, but you know, we still have people being the may owe federal taxes, or sometimes you have the innocent spouse that gets stuck by the spouse that ran off and left them owing on a joint return that they knew nothing about what was going on. So our low-income tax clinic staff can work with people. We have an immigration and language rights center. Do have some limits on who they can represent and who they can't represent. We have special funding through the VA for a military assistance project. So it works with, they provide assistance to veterans on veterans issues. And if there's low income military families, I think it's more often the veterans that they're working with. I had an interesting case where I had a veteran who lost his home in a tax sale case, and he really was he was suffering from post-traumatic stress syndrome, and it was a little bit hard for me to deal with, but kind of concluded that it was really his disability that had prevented him from responding in time and redeeming his house from the tax sale, even though he had a healthy income coming in with his veterans benefits, at least compared to a lot of my clients. He had enough really to pay the taxes. It just somehow never got the taxes paid. And so we ended up filing an ADA accommodation request to object to the tax sale, and the paralegal with the military assistance project, who is a veteran himself, paired up with me, and he was great in just being able to work with the client and develop a rapport and work through some of his anger issues. And we ended up getting a settlement where we were able to preserve his home for him. He had to come up with some money to pay the tax sale purchaser, who ended up, when they learned of his situation, they were willing to work with us to get to a solution. So just being able to work with the military assistance project and their knowledge of working with veterans was helpful. We have Again, Victims of Crime Act funds to work with domestic violence victims. We have a special project working with the LGBTQ plus population. And we have a workers' rights and protection project. And interestingly, we work with people who are victims of human trafficking who get referred to us, and trying to help them, sort out their legal issues, some of which are, maybe a result of having been trafficked and getting into debt and various issues. So we have a number of special projects, but anybody who's under the guidelines can request assistance. And basically they don't need to know which project they need assistance from. They can simply call, that number or apply online, and then our staff will review it. And then our goal is to get it routed to the appropriate group to review their request for assistance. Let me see if I think that may be all the slides I prepared. Last slide has my contact information, and happy to field any other questions that may have generated for you, Jim, either about our services, or if you have some questions about elder law topics you wanted to raise.
Well, I was just going to say, I was really thrilled to find out that you do help people with the civil situations, like, because frankly, I see a lot of, I was in the real estate business for a very, very long time. Okay. And so, basically since the earth was cooling. So I was from that world. And I recall sitting down with my mom. She still owned her farm between Noblesville and Carmel and Westfield at the time. And this investor group was, wanting to talk to her about listing it with their investors. So we met with them because they supposedly had this great big pool of investors that would do this. So I walk in there. I was fairly high profile in the industry, so it wasn't like I was hiding, who my affiliation was. I managed 14 real estate offices and about 350 agents, and I was wearing a shirt that had our logo on it. So it wasn't like I was, coming in covert, and they went through their proposals and what they were going to do, and they didn't make any sense to us. They were supposedly they would not put it on the market. It would all be done quietly through this investor chain. I'm going, why would we not want the full market to see it? It made no sense to me. So we left, and we, thank you for your time, but we're out of here. And so we take off. And then I got thinking about it. I'm going, everything they said sounded like a listing. They showed us a document that looked like a listing presentation. So I Googled real quick and found out that neither one of the principals on this were actually licensed realtors. Then I looked to see if they were licensed attorneys, because that would have been another option. And no, they were not. So I'm going, there's no way legally they call it something besides a listing agreement, but it's still a listing agreement. So I called the Attorney General's office on it, because I told him, I said, we have not been harmed. So we don't have any case. We have nothing to say. But not every old lady has a son that runs real estate companies. So I'm going, and so they did put them in a cease and desist. But I'm going, if it happened to us and they did it right in front of me, I'm sure they're going, how often does this happen to people?
Yeah, I mean, we do. There really are now, I don't know. I'm seeing, there's all these cash buyers. I mean, at my home, I get postcards. I'll buy your home.
Yeah, me too.
I mean, it's like, and some people, and then, if they go door to door, particularly if you have a senior with diminished capacity. I mean, I've seen one kind of sad case, and I don't know that there's going to be anything we could do, where a lady signed to sell the property, and maybe not clear to me that it was at what she could have gotten on the market, although I don't know really the condition of her house, just
Right.
comparing it to what the tax appraisal is. And then she tried to back out, and then they sued in court. They sued in court to enforce, and she didn't respond to the lawsuit, and they got a default judgment, and she's kind of in a bad way now. I mean, it may be too late to do anything in that case. So there are cases out there. There are, the best thing is if one can do education and help people from getting into the situation. Unfortunately, some of the people that need the help the most aren't seeing the educational offerings, or not aware of them, or may not be on the internet and have access, and may be vulnerable. And you do see too with the people can appear to have full capacity, but sometimes it's that, one of the things I've learned in trainings is that executive functioning, understand judgment can go, even though that person may be able to do their daily activities. So those can be real difficult situations.
Well, and then there's, especially with the seniors as well, I don't know who they are, but they say that that the downsize move for a senior, when they're getting ready, which is what we do, is we help people through that transition of downsizing and all kind of stuff, and packing, moving, selling their stuff, whatever. But we're really cognizant of trying to help them transition without going through, trying to minimize the stress, if that makes any sense,
Right.
Because I recall, from a personal experience, when my mom did list her farm, she grew, her husband, my dad, was a broker for years. I'm a broker. My brother was a broker, so it like, what was a dinner table conversation for decades, it was about real estate and whatever. So when we were listing her place, she went into like a panic attack because she didn't understand, and we had to like put things back and help her do it. Here's a woman who understood it better than probably 99% of the people on the marketplace, but it was now this emotional charged, I don't really want to leave my home. I really, but health wise had to, and still got to a panic point where she didn't understand what was going on. And she's totally cognitive, fine. So my point is, if that happened to her, trying to do something slick and stuff with a senior, especially at that vulnerable time, is something that needs to be watched.
It certainly is. And an attorney that's now retired from our project, who also happens to be married to me,
So
was,
you know how to get a hold of her.
She would always say there's this sweet spot for a person to make decisions and move. And while you're, you should be making those decisions on, can I remain in this home? And because you hear lots of people saying, my goal is to remain in this house as long as I live. Well, so for some people, that house is not really, it may not be accessible. It's got steps. It's not handicap accessible. They're getting harder and harder to get up the steps. I mean, my own parents had a place out in the country. My dad had severe health issues. They managed to make a decision when they were in the sweet spot. And my wife's position was, people get past that. It's not only emotional, but physically, it just gets too hard to move, and they get stuck in inertia, and it's too late for them. Yeah. And unless they have family that could step in,
or someone like me,
or someone like you, but there are too many people that, either the family is spread out, either they don't have family, or the family is spread out too far and isn't aware of what's going on, or has lost connections, or they've outlived other members of the family and don't really have those connections with church or other groups of people who can step in and help. It gets to be, it can be very difficult.
It can, like I said, we do run into situations where we'll get a call from like a social worker or from somebody that, maybe somebody at a rehab facility, and this person has, who knows why, every bridge around them has been burned. They have nobody at all to come in, and we've had to help them through the entire process. And I wonder, I mean, it's like, if they didn't have someone like that, who's going to help them? How can, I mean, they don't physically couldn't do it, and they still need it done, so.
Right. And then we have some clients that have some hoarding issues,
Yeah.
and
Oh,
that
yeah.
can be, they've got OCD, obsessive compulsive, not that I can diagnose that, but it's, they've got something going on where they just can't let go of their possessions, no matter how you'd say, there's.
We've done a lot of that as well, but normally we've only done it for the actual person, the hoarder once. The rest of the time it's been for a family member or for a guardian or a trustee or what
Somebody's
have you.
cleaning out after they've gotten the authority to act for them.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
Yeah.
Dennis, thank you so much for being here and sharing with us. I can't believe our time is already up. I really want to thank you. I will put this out. I'll send you a copy of this so you use any way you want to, and we'll talk later. But I'll put how to contact you like underneath the thing that's out on the Facebook Live and stuff too. So thank you for sharing with us.
Thank you, Jim. I've enjoyed the conversation with you today.
All righty, man. Thank you, Dennis. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.